Hi, everybody. I'm Tyra Butler, licensed marriage and family therapist. My office here in Norco, California, and I'm here with Joane Friedman. And can you please introduce yourself, Joane?
Yes, hi. As Tyra said, I'm Joane Friedman. I am a PhD in clinical psychology. I specialize in the treatment of twins, which sounds like a strange sort of thing to do, but I'm an identical twin and I have adult fraternal twin boys. And I became interested in the subject because of my own experience growing up as a twin and because of parenting twins.
And so Joane's going to be doing a presentation on the unique aspects of working with twins.
That's right. I think
Mm-hmm.
what I found to be so interesting, which got me hooked into this, was I had in my own therapy, of course, explored what it was like to grow up as a twin. And I've come to write about and learn that the developmental experience of growing up with a same-age sibling really does affect a lot of your personality, your life choices, some difficulties you may have, and I also felt that parenting my boys was a way to sort of undo a lot of the mishaps that I think my parents didn't really understand about my twin sister, Jane. We're identical twins, and there's some differences with identical and fraternals, but there's basically a general underlying sort of developmental line that you can look for to understand how twins' development is so very different from being raised as a singleton.
Yeah, dramatically different, huh?
Yeah. And I think
Mhm.
what's so fascinating is people assume that being a twin is always wonderful. And since my focus has been on issues and problems and difficulties and psychological vulnerabilities, when people ask me, well, what do you do? I specialize in twins. I specialize actually in twins who might have some difficulties. What? Twins have difficulties? That's incredible. They're supposed to be best friends and soulmates and have ESP and never be alone.
Mm.
And so it's been a very interesting sort of uphill battle to try to educate parents and other health professionals about the fact that there are some real difficulties when you grow up with someone else who you may or
Mhm.
may not want to be there. So it's been a fascinating kind of career move for me.
Yeah, I can imagine, because even as a therapist myself, I think, about the twin dynamic before reading your literature and the stuff that you sent me. My prior notion of the, relational dynamic of twins, because I have a girlfriend, one of my best girlfriends with a pair of fraternal twins though.
Uh-huh.
And I think, wow, they have this unfettered, like constant connection with someone that's like their best friend, and to
Yeah,
have that deep emotional connection, and companionship. It seems like the ultimate kind of relationship that I think that even some adults kind of seek out, finding in adulthood, trying to find that kind of like twinship, like my soulmate type of thing. Like we tend to project onto twins thinking, oh yeah, they're like that ultimate closeness that you can have, but you've experienced otherwise. And in
yeah,
working with clients, you've learned and discovered that there's problems that can occur.
exactly. And I do think that again, most twin pairs do get along. It's a smaller percentage of those who don't. But
Mhm.
when I started writing my books, I mean, people found me on the internet and were so thankful and grateful that I was giving a voice to issues and problems that nobody else was talking about. Because
Mhm.
twins, because what you said, they don't have anyone they feel they can go to or who will understand, because their relationship is such that it's, you people grow up with a sibling and you can be mad or hate your sibling or be in fights and not talk and all of that. But when twins don't talk to each other, or they're not getting along, or they're fighting incessantly, everyone thinks that there's something terribly wrong. And parents often feel like they're failures if their twins aren't getting along. So twins
Mhm.
don't have the actually the permission to be adversaries or not, or to really kind of work out the love and hate ambivalence dynamic that most different age siblings have. So when they grow up, as they grow up, and they find that they really are resentful or angry or unhappy, they feel that having these feelings about their twin is being absolutely disloyal to the person they love most in the world. So they don't have the sort of the space to have the normal ambivalence that singletons have and always kind of act out. They are sort of plagued with guilt and sadness that these negative feelings that they have is like the ultimate sense of betrayal. So, so finding a therapist who understands that they have negative feelings, but it doesn't mean they don't love their twin, is very hard to find because of exactly what you said, that the societal projection is, well, they've got to love each other and they've got to be best friends, and if not, something's terribly wrong. So that's one of the bigger developmental burdens that twins growing up have to handle. And often it happens in adolescence, because that's really when you want to have your own identity. You want to have your own space. You want to have your own friends. You want people to know who you are. And so it's very turbulent for some twin pairs in adolescence when this wish to be much more differentiated comes out, and they don't have any kind of family support or societal support to give them the space to make that happen.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't ever thought about before, that how the twinship affects that individuation, differentiation process is highly notable in adolescence.
Right. And very charged too.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about that, how it's charged?
Well, I mean, if I can give you an example, one of the adolescents that I've worked with, I mean, it's like it can become really extreme. Like one will become like a goth or completely become, a completely different person. So that he's not at all confused anymore with her twin. And she'll work really hard to try to have her own activities, to have her own friends. And you'd be so surprised, though. Parents are upset if the twin leaves out the other twin in these kind of social, situations. So because the parent will say, your sister's not going anywhere, please don't leave her out. It's not right. It's not fair. You're not being a good sister. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of pressure when one should be just hopefully being given the permission to, be their own person. So for some families and for some twin pairs, it gets to be very difficult and very tricky during adolescence. The next part is when they decide to go to separate colleges or not. And I'd say this is when the most kind of crucial kind of breaks come out or problems come out, because oftentimes this is not given any thought. With Jane and me, I was in the same situation. We were never apart. We lived, in the same room. We grew up, same friends, same high school, everything. But all we did was we wanted to go to separate colleges. That's all we knew. But we had no idea how being separated was going to impact our experience, because all of a sudden we're singletons. Which is like being a fish out of water. You've never lived with anyone but your sister. You've never socialized without her. You've never studied without her. You've never lived without her. And all of a sudden that changes and you're put into a whole situations with strangers. It's hard enough going to college. I have 5 kids, and they all had, interesting difficulty adjusting because it's kind of normal. But if you put the normal college adjustment on top of the twin dynamics, and recognize how incredibly difficult that is when a twin has no idea about what's going to happen, is completely unprepared because there's been no preparation prior to separating to college where they've ever been on their own. So the results are really mixed for a lot of people. Some twins drop out because they can't handle it. Some twins end up transferring to their sister or brother's school. Some, weather this rocky period and become adjusted. But it's a really fascinating, interesting dynamic to think about. It's not just a regular adjustment to college. It's fraught with all this other sort of stuff that if you were to see in college a twin having separation anxiety or, anxiety adjustment, you would have to really factor in the twin piece to understand, how he or she was having so much trouble coping. And so that's been a big issue for me, people calling me helping them with that, because that seems to be a crucial breaking point where there's a lot of difficulties.
Mm-hmm. So you get parents and clients calling you with issues around the adolescent years and going off to college.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of parents don't really recognize that their twin should be having any difficulties. Like one mother I worked with, one twin got in early decision to where she wanted to go. Then her sister got admitted to the same school. And of course, it would have been the mother's role at that point to say to the twin, you know what, your sister's already chosen this school. She got in early decision. You should wait and choose from these other schools because, she can have her own place. But no, she didn't do that. Mother didn't do that. And the twin went to ask her sister, who had already been admitted, if she could go to the same school. And the twin had no capacity to say no. It's not her position. So they both end up going to the same school. They don't speak to each other. And that's when the mother called me because she didn't understand why they weren't speaking. It's like, because she was completely unaware of what her daughters might be needing or wanting or looking for. She as a mother, all she talked about was they had terrific twin synergy. And she felt that their twin synergy was what was going to carry them through their college years. So this is what some people go through. They're actually so blinded by what I talk about as the twin mystique, as it's somehow going to become, the biggest thing that these kids have. But there's a whole big issue about twin social status. Twins don't have to work very hard making friends, because a lot of people know they gravitate toward them. They're kind of given some sort of special status. But the older you get, people thinking that you're twins is not so special anymore. So if they have never separated and differentiated and made some sort of strides socially on their own, they become, in a way, very socially crippled, in their 20s or in their 30s, because they haven't developed the social skills to be okay being a singleton, not introducing themselves as twins.
Yeah, and what impact does that have? What do you find that lack of social skills to build and foster other friendships and relationships, what impact does that have on their ability to do that? What do you see happening?
Well, in the most severe cases, what I see happening is they really stay together. They need each other, in a very unhealthy fashion. So they keep on living together, being together, maybe working together, and they develop, a very unhealthy dependency. And if one or the other tries to move away from that, the other one reacts with a tremendous amount of anger and guilt, and often doesn't want the twin to leave, because they really are only at that point half of a whole. They haven't really differentiated and individuated. They don't have each of them a complete self to be on their own. So that's a really unhealthy situation. And lots of times, by the time someone in that situation calls me, it's oftentimes too late, because their attachment patterns are so entrenched and they're so kind of behind the eight ball in terms of development that they're really stuck. And it's really sad. And it doesn't have to happen, but it happens because I think parents are unaware of how important it is to give twins separate experiences. They don't understand that. And you can't just do it at the end of their lives. You can't do it at 18. It's something you have to be thinking about. And that's in my first book. That's what I talk about, is trying to think of twins as two separate beings and giving them separate things to do so that the parents can have a separate attachment with each one of them. Because what happens is the twins become much more attached to one another than they do to the parents. And as a therapist, that doesn't give you all the tools that you need to feel that you are a happy, functioning person on your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that was something I was going to ask too. The impact on the relationship with the primary caregiver, the parent, that the closeness of the twin bond can actually inhibit that attachment to the parent or the caregiver, and how you were talking about how important it is that the parent not allow the closeness of the twinship to hinder or negatively impact that attachment. So I would imagine that the mother or the primary caregiver has to put more effort into establishing and maintaining those unique and individual relationships with each twin.
Yes, and of course, it's very hard to ask mothers to do that. They're already so overwhelmed.
Right, just practically speaking.
Of two babies. But if they have it in their mind that this is important, it doesn't have to be like a big deal. It can be, taking one in one room and reading while the other one's napping, or taking one, for a walk while your partner or husband can be home, or taking one to the market, or, just one dad told me, they didn't have any help, so we just took turns walking with one to the mailbox. It's not so much what you do, it's engendering this idea that you're attaching yourself to two separate children. And so the metaphor of doing separate activities is what helps foster that. And also, it's like, and every twin mother will tell you this, being with one twin is such a delight, because there's not two to take care of. There's so less fighting. You never really get to enjoy one baby at a time, or one toddler at a time. And not until parents do that do they recognize how nice it is and what they're missing by not carving out some alone time. In addition to helping them facilitate an attachment to each one, and to figure out their personalities and their differences and their strengths and their own uniqueness. And you can't do that in the presence of another baby. It's just too hard. So it's really a frame of mind about, attaching to each one, and then trying to facilitate the environment to allow the psychic environment to help you develop, that kind of single attachment to each twin. But it's hard, and you have to be committed to it. And a lot of parents don't do it. They can't do it. They don't think it's important. And they get so much narcissistic kind of enhancement by being the mother of twins or the parent of twins, that they end up fostering that piece rather than fostering the individuality. So, I mean, when I had my twins, and having had all of that narcissistic stuff and having it really be of actually very little use and upsetting in terms of my own upbringing and my own sense of self, I just took my boys to different classes. I did different things. I never said they were twins. Really tried to give them the experience of being singletons as much as I could. And again, I did a lot of crazy things because of my own experience. People always laugh at me, but it worked. They're very good friends, and they're very differentiated. So I feel good about it, even though it was a little crazy. But I don't expect people to do what I did, because it was really crazy. But it's the same idea of fostering, kind of intrapsychically, a sense of a singular attachment.
Can you give us just a little taste of what you're referring to?
Oh, of course.
It was crazy.
We didn't tell them who was older until they were 13. because I spent my entire life being, are you older? How many more minutes older? Are you older? Who's older? And that becomes so important if you're a twin. I'm the older twin by 3 minutes, because that's all anybody sort of knew or understood about me being different from my sister Jane.
Mm.
So, it's so stupid, especially most women have C-sections. So, I mean, ridiculous. You're pulled out a half a second. Oh, you're the older twin. So that was off the table. Another thing I did was I told them from the time they could understand that we were doing things to prepare them to be able to go to college on their own, that they were going to separate colleges, and that we were going to be doing all these things beforehand to make them resilient enough to be on their own. So that meant they were always in the same schools, but they were in different classes. By the time when it was developmentally appropriate, they went to different day camps. We put them on different soccer teams. Then they went to different overnight camps. And they went to different community service countries. They had so many experiences of being away from each other, and they hated it. Both of them hated it for different reasons based on their personalities. But what it did was, if you don't have any resilience built up in yourself about, well, I hated being away from Johnny, but I handled it, or I hated being away from David, but I did it. So they go to college, and some of the same thing happened. But I'm sort of convinced that one of the boys who's shy, who had a much harder time adjusting, I think without all the prior things we had made him do, he would have come home, because he wouldn't have had built up inside of himself that he's been through something like this before and he managed somehow. And without giving your children some sense of what they can handle, how can we expect them to then be put in these kind of circumstances and think that they're going to handle it? So it was a lot of things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I can see the benefit in that. I don't know if it sounds crazy though, but I can see
well, it's crazy. We had 5 kids, and
a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I was so focused and crazy about it just because of me. That how we do crazy things with our kids to try to undo what damage.
Yes, to undo and not repeat the same patterns. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I'm in that right now. I have a 3-year-old. So. Singleton though.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And I was wondering if I could circle back real quick before we end and wrap it up. You mentioned that some moms might get caught up in the narcissistic aspect of having twins. Can you touch on that real quick?
Of course. And it's again, having 2 babies, mothers are usually really, really overwhelmed, and they're usually really angry because they feel robbed of a one-to-one kind of an attachment. And they're exhausted, and they're tired, and they're angry. And usually, if there's been like a NICU experience before, it's so much trauma.
Right, they're traumatized.
They are traumatized, but they're also traumatized by if you're thank God I had my twins last. If they had been my first kids and I wasn't an experienced parent, it's hard enough the first time, much less with one, much less having 2. So there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety and depression and worry. And so oftentimes what happens is the only way to feel better about yourself as a mother, since you feel so overwhelmed and helpless and out of control, is to kind of sort of like, oh yeah, I have twins. And so it's a way of sort of counteracting the helplessness and the powerlessness of the guilt, really, of trying to feel connected. If you talk to most mothers of twins, they'll tell you the first 6 months or the first year is absolute blur. And they really feel bad about that because the caretaking issues are so much greater you don't have time for the emotional bonding. And that's what I found out too, because I had 3 singletons, and then I figured, ugh, okay, I don't never like the baby stage, but I figured, oh, how bad can this be? But it was really different in terms of the emotional aspect. You don't feel in control. You don't feel masterful. You don't feel that you're connecting to each one of them the way you'd like to. So it's a much harder emotional roller coaster that first 6 months or that first year. So in order to deal with it, sometimes focusing on their being twins and being cute and dressing them alike and giving them horribly alliterative names. I mean, I think that's a way of making yourself feel better, because the journey in the beginning is so very difficult. That makes sense? Also, what happens too is a lot of, as the twins get older, the mother feels kind of left out because the twins are together a lot. So I think unless she's fighting to get in there and have her separate attachment, she can feel very resentful and just go, okay, fine. Or maybe she just wants to be relieved, like, okay, fine, yeah, we'll do this together. They're going to go together. They'll play together. They'll do this together. I mean, when I've talked to parents and I say, doing things separately, why do they have to be together? I mean, yes, it's convenient, but they somehow think that that's what the children want. And if you wait, and then they say, but if I separate my twins, they cry. I said, well, of course, if you don't do this early, of course they're going to cry. They want to be together because, they're always together. So it's really trying to impress upon them that they don't always want to be together, but they have been. So, of course, they don't want to separate. And if the parents don't understand the developmental importance of the separation for the parenting as well as for the child, then it's a battle, and they don't want to fight it. And then, so what can happen is called this thing, the power of 2. Some teachers have found out that if twins are in their classroom, they are a force to contend with, because they just deal with each other and they don't listen, and they're just accustomed to sort of being in charge and being in control. And it's very interesting. I mean, it's terrible for the teacher, but it's a very interesting dynamic that makes sense that it would happen if there's not the parental intervention that we're talking about.
Yeah, I could see the impact of that for sure in classrooms and elsewhere. Okay, so I want to thank Joane Friedman and let you guys all know that she will be presenting on January 25th at 9 a.m. at Loma Linda University in San Bernardino. From 9 to 11 a.m. and we're really excited and honored to have her. She will be talking about all of this and more, and she'll be sharing treatment approaches and ways that you can better enhance your clinical skills and knowledge in working with families and couples that have twins, and so that you can just be better informed and equipped and gain from her valuable expertise and knowledge. So thank you for joining me, Joan. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Well, likewise, it was a pleasure talking with you, and I will see you.
Yes, I'll see you Friday the 25th.
Okay, thank you.